In association with Get a Tax Rebate, 1895 Sports, Mesa Vienna Aesthetics, CDX Security.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Oddball Woody Show, where today we've got a psychotherapist, and this is, I say it whenever we get this type of topic on, this is the stuff that interests me, and even more so now because I'm delving into my counselling course, so it's puts a new dynamic on me, and hopefully I can learn a few things as well. So this guy's psychotherapist for the mentality. He's got his own practice, and the thing that's brought him here and what really interests me is the recent research paper that he's just been involved in, which took part with numerous ex-professional rugby league players, coaches, and rugby league historians, and it's been looking at the vulnerability in rugby league, and it's been looking at the mental health aspect of it. So I'd like to welcome on Jon Bell. How are you doing, John?
Not bad, Paul. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not too bad. Yeah. It's I say it every week when I'm obsessed. I've got this obsession with how people tick and sort of what drives us as human beings and what creates, a good team environment and what creates a bad team environment, and the different personalities that we have. And it's always interested me, but even more so since I've come away from rugby, because I did a spell where I was in sales, and a lot of it was down to the psychology and building relationships and creating trust with people. And it seems like the foundations of a good environment, or getting along with people, seem to be these basic things of safety and trust, and being able to get along with people. So it does really interest me, and it's always good to get another person's perspective who's in the industry, and obviously you'll be able to educate me a lot deeper into why that is. So it will be an interesting chat. But first of all, what have you been up to lately, John? Have you been up to much other than your research?
Well, the clinics have obviously with mentality. Obviously, Stevie Ward's project that he's been running, his organisation been running for the last 5 years. We've recently launched our counselling and psychotherapy arm of mentality, which has been going great guns, really good. I've also launched my own clinic as well. So Jon Bell Counselling over in York, sports therapy, counselling and sports therapy. It opened recently. And I had a couple of messages congratulating me, saying, this is brilliant, really well done, I'm sure it's going to be really successful. But the reality of it is that I've spent the last day and a half buggering around in garden trying to make a shed base for my office to go in, and I'm absolutely knackered. So I'm going to be putting my clinic in the back garden. It's going to be really, really good when it arrives, and some people who know what they're doing are going to put it up. But I've got to create the shed base, and so I'll be doing manual labour, which I'm not accustomed to, and I get massive imposter syndrome every time I have to go into B&Q, because I look basically like the sort of fellow who might know what he's doing, and then they use words at me. They use technical words, and they ask me if I've got things that I ain't got, and I just go, mate, no, don't believe this. Shaved head and that. No, I don't know what I'm talking about. You need to really, really help me out. And so I finally put the spade in the ground today, started digging it, and I knew that I was coming on podcast with you at 7:00 this evening, so I had to stop at 3:00. So I had to have a bath and possibly try out the snooze. So I'm going to be absolutely knackered. It's proper done me in.
One of the things I start doing now when I go to B&Q, because I get that imposter syndrome where you think, I don't belong in here. You just buy a pair of steel toe caps, buy some jeans, put a few rips in them and a t-shirt, and you look the part, and then you just fit in then, don't you? But I'm the same. Mate, I can go and I don't even know what I'm buying if I need to hang a picture for the wall, and it sounds bad, but yeah. I am absolutely shocking with all that stuff.
It is really bad, and as soon as they start talking to you and telling you all spiel about how things should work, you start saying, just come round house, will you, and do it, because I don't know what's going on. Just come do it, will you? Let's not have all this chat. I'm not being authentic here. I'm supposed to spend my life being authentic now.
Do you know what? I just tend to get people to pay to do the jobs for me now, because it's too much hassle for me to start doing a job, then bring somebody in just to rectify my issue. So I just try and, if I can afford it, I'll pay it. If not, I just put it off.
I should do that, really.
So, John, what we'll do, mate, is I like to start off. I like knowing a bit of background about people and sort of what took you to being a therapist. Because I've spoke to you over the phone. I think the first time we spoke, we had a 45-minute conversation as I was driving over Dartford Tunnel, so
that's right, yeah.
or under. But it's interesting. I can obviously see that it's a passion of yours. You know, this mental health subject and, you know, the psychotherapy. So just give us a brief background, really, to what brought you to where you are today.
In terms of where I am today with the dissertation and rugby league, like for so many of us, has been in my life as long as I remember, ever since my dad, who was from Bradford, sat me on them cold barriers at Odsal in 1985. Which I have days like today when we've got hammered by Sheffield. I don't particularly thank him for, to be honest.
In that result.
God, it's going to be a long old year. Fingers crossed. But you know, it's been in my blood. It's been in my family as rugby league since I have been very little, and so from playing school rugby through to strangely and bizarrely getting to a stage where I got offered a couple of contracts to play. You know, it was really funny because I had a conversation with my old man yesterday, and he asked me what's your favourite sort of rugby, and I was thinking about rugby being sort of combination between how much fun you had and how much success you had. And our school team were brilliant. We'd got some outstanding players. I were a good player eventually, but we had some outstanding players who went on and played a bit in the professional game. And we had a great time. We hardly trained. We just got together. We all played in local Wakefield club sides, got together and ripped it up every week. And we never questioned it. Things just happened magically. So I was fortunate enough to, a lot of my mates had played for Yorkshire all the way through ranks, but I finally played under 18s. And off the back of that, I played Bala Great Britain. And I played with our mate Mickey Iam, and a couple of other really, really good players as well, who came on that tour. Oliver Wilkes was on that tour as well. There were some fine players who went on to have really good careers. And I went on that tour, played against France, played against their under-18 team, which it really wasn't. I was saying that on another podcast of the week, and I was saying, I felt a bit suspicious about the fact that when we were pulling up and getting off coach, they were all kissing their wives and kids. Right, that's right. Something not right here, but you know, don't question it. In you go. So yeah, I played Bala Great Britain, and then I signed for Huddersfield, and I didn't have like a lot of lads who go into the academy and twos. It didn't turn out to be what I hoped it would be. I had some significant injury problems. I had a shoulder reconstruction really early on in my time there. And I probably signed with a bit of a damaged shoulder that never got picked up, but I played a year on the shoulder that kept doing things. And I didn't really get the care and concern. But then also, I was so desperate and so prepared to pretend that things were okay that I did. I just carried on going, and finally when they came to have a look in there, it was like a jigsaw puzzle. It was a bit of a mess. So I kind of got the impression that my time was limited, both in terms of how confident and comfortable I felt at the club. I'd also signed, and it was quite clear when I signed that they wanted to sign someone else. It was me and another another lad who they wanted to sign. So they did sign him eventually, and I moved positions to accommodate him. I'm glad we did, because scored loads of tries off the back of him, because he was a far better standoff than I'd ever be. I just had step. I just had step and loads of pace, but he'd got hands, absolute golden hands. And so when it finally came to sort of contract ending, I had no interest in discussing any sort of negotiation to stay or anything like that. But at that point, my sort of time in rugby league, professional rugby league, were finished, and I was kind of relieved. I never really had any sort of form that I'd promised. I never really had the confidence that I'd arrived with. I'd never really felt like an environment where anyone was particularly interested. And once you feel like that, once you feel that someone's not interested, as a boy, and I was a boy, there's no doubt about it, and I think you're a boy way into your 20s as well, disclaimer on that one, because we don't grow up for a long time, unfortunately. I think once you get wind that you're in a situation where you're not particularly being invested in, or that it's going to rely on a bit of luck with your injuries, I think I knew the writing was on the wall. And as I sort of touch on in my research, you go through a bit of a grief process. So I was turning up to games just feeling like I was, just empty and angry and didn't want to play, desperate for phone to ring and say, look, it's been called off. Not that it ever really does at that sort of level, but, hoping games would get called off and, playing awfully when I did. Absolutely I were rats. I were terrible, because I just didn't want to be there. And so that ended, and I went to go play some rugby union, which were, yeah, I know. And you tell my 11, 12-year-old that I'd be playing rah-rah. Bloody hell, never. And I went, and I had the best time. I had a really good time. We had a couple of good seasons at Huddersfield Rugby Union, who took care of us. I made some really, really good mates. I've got mates with today. The social side was great. They liked beer. Everyone sort of got on really well, and it was lovely. It was lovely, and it were easy as well. It were really easy for a back. I mean, I don't imagine the forward experience is too much fun. But I had a pretty easy time. I stand out at wing, loads of room, score some points. We were all right. We were good. It was really good, and so I played that for a bit. So I left, and in between working in public relations, which was my last job before I became a therapist. Well, actually, I'm working with Leeds City Council now, but like I said, my last job before I moved back up north. I've been a history teacher, worked in education and recruitment and what have you. And I've had an okay career post rugby, and so I qualified with a history degree. My first degree was in history, and most people said, "Oh, you're going to be an history teacher," and I was like, "No, absolutely not going to be an history teacher." Come find me a couple of years later, teaching history. So there we are. The writing was on the wall. Lesson in knowing thyself a little bit, that, to be honest. So teaching was a bit of a gateway drug for therapy as well, because if you're going to get the most out of your pupils, you've got to know how they tick. And you've also got to know that in order for them to fulfill their potential, but also fulfill and their own desire to find their meaning and their purpose in life and actually do well, you've got to remove barriers. You've got to be in the business of removing barriers for people and supporting. And so much of teaching is about understanding what makes a student tick and what makes someone tick and how you can support that. And so it was a bit of a gateway drug. And so fast forward to a few years later, I had my own sort of brush with mental health problems. I've had this conversation with a few people. Stevie Ward, actually, most recently, we had a conversation where we talked about how you have versions of yourself, and I think that I probably had run out of the tracks that I was running in my head in terms of my narratives, my idea of my purpose, idea of the person that I was. I'd probably run over by a good 6 years. That was an outdated version. I'd simply not challenged myself. I just sat there in denial for quite a lot of things. And then a few things happened in my personal life where I didn't have the ability to fight back anymore. And I was looking to do a master's anyway. And I jumped very quickly. So I was going to do an MBA. I was going to do like business administration. I'm not interested in business or administration. Like, I couldn't give a shit. Like, so I don't know why I was suddenly compelled to get involved in this. I think I was doing, just once again, that inauthentic thing where you're trying to please people, doing something that would be good for work, putting myself 10 grand in the hole just to please people. I went, no, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do something that I love. And I went to the university, interviewed. At this point, I'd got a cast on my leg because I had snapped my Achilles tendon going back and playing rugby union in southwest Wales because I was lonely and fed up. I wanted to make mates. So what do you do when you're a rugby lad? You go to a rugby club. Unfortunately, my Achilles tendon didn't really agree and it snapped in my first training session. So that was that done. And the consultant who came to speak to me, he went, all rugby players never learn. And I went, that's quite true, fair enough. So I left me be. But at this point, I got a pot on my leg. I was, I'd got a diagnosis of anxiety and depression at the time. And I went there, and it's probably the first authentic conversation, not that I've ever had, but the first time I've ever presented myself in a room thinking, this is exactly who I am. This is exactly who I am. This is what I want to do. If you don't want to do it, if you don't want to take me up on this offer and have me on your course, then at least I've said my piece. And that's something that I really still live by now. You're only ever designed to hold up your end of the bargain. You can't really account for other people's decisions and other people's plans, plots, or whatever. But I knew when I left that room that I'd held up my end of the bargain to myself. And actually, I got a phone call later on. And they were like, "Yeah, we'd love to have you." So then, 4 years of a master's course, a part-time master's course in Southwest Wales, where I was living at the time. And when it came to dissertation time, that was when the subject of rugby league, which has continued to play a part in my life. Like I say, I'm a Bradford fan, which is proving to be challenging over the last couple of years. However, we've had our days, and I'm grateful, and I'll stick with them. But the game's always played a big part in my life. It's always been a real source of love, source of just. Rugby league's got a family aspect to it that is not just a family game and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I know they say that, but actually more than that, it feels like coming home. If you put me on them steps at Odsal, which you can't do at the minute because we're not actually owning ground at the minute. But if you put me on them steps at Odsal, I'm a little boy again. It feels like home. It's a wonderful, and everyone's got it. Everyone's got their own individual disease for their own club. And so to return to rugby league and look at it through a different lens and look at the aspects of vulnerability, something I really struggled with myself, who I was and how I pressed my case and how I felt I could or couldn't be during a time that was really difficult for me. That was really appealing to look at it because I was using my new skills to look at old territory.
Yeah. So it sounds like, you've experienced at Huddersfield, it weren't particularly that enjoyable as, like you mentioned the word expectations, you had this expectation of how it was going to be and it just didn't live up to them expectations. And sounds like that sort of shaped, your passion really for the, this aspect of research that you've gone down. And, it's interesting because, we're similar age. I think, you're a year older than me, you're the same age as Mickey.
Yeah, I'm 41 now.
Yeah, so it's interesting, because I can take myself back to growing up in the academy myself, and the attitude that was around rugby culture, especially a rugby league culture at a professional level. It's tough in amateur, but then it steps up a notch in the professional game, and it's all about how tough you're going to be. And like you mentioned there in your introduction, that you didn't feel cared for. No one gave a shit. No one wanted to speak to you. When you're injured, and that is it's a big part in rugby league, and at least it's recognised now. I'm back involved in some capacity at Warrington, and they're doing some great stuff with the academy kids. But I can certainly relate to what you were saying in your academy days, and the tough background and the attitude. It was, it was the type of attitude is we'll just hit them with a stick. If they make it, then fantastic. If they don't, then we just push them back to their amateur clubs, or they just drop away from the game. And that tended to be the mentality. Thankfully, it is changing a little bit now.
Yeah, and it looks like it, and I'm really glad. My experience is thousands of other people's. It absolutely is, and there's nothing. We're only talking about it, I guess, because I've written what I've written. But it really wasn't. I signed my contract with it. We trained at a high school in Huddersfield, and I signed my contract in changing rooms with a towel around me. I got a contract thrust in my face. And, oh, here it is. Can you sign it? And I went home and told my old man I'd signed it. And we didn't have illusions of like pitch side announcements, but something a little bit more formal that we could remember and cherish better than me. Bare assed apart from a towel in a steamy changing rooms.
I think that's still happening now in professional rugby league. I think that's the thing with. I mean, we'll touch on this because it's ultimately, Luke, it's a working man class sport. There's a culture around it, and this working class background type of mentality. And I can tell you now, there's still a lack of professionalism in rugby league. There's a lack of professionalism. The only thing that makes rugby league professional sometimes is the fact that they get paid money for playing a game. And there's a lot of other aspects which so let it down. And you're just naming one of them there.
Yeah. It's pretty funny now, actually. It is pretty funny. But at the time, I didn't know. I remember being so young, I didn't know to be disappointed. And it was only when I started looking at my old man's face, he kind of went, what? I'd come from a really nurturing club, but amateur club that didn't have 2 pence to scratch its arse with from Wakefield, Eastmore club. It was the other side of town to me. And I want Eastmore born and bred, but, they looked after all the players. Didn't matter where you were from. They absolutely looked after all the players. And, they weren't the richest of clubs, but you got well treated. And I went from there to professional game, and I went, oh, this is...
Well, that's the thing, John, as well, because I think as a young lad growing up, I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, but my whole perception is that I want to play professional rugby league, and I want to do the signing of the contract in the office. I want to have my picture taken. I want to be in the local press. I want it to be in a programme. And I was quite fortunate, really, and I've still got the rugby programme here, and they did put it out there like that at Warrington. But I would have been megally disappointed if that would have happened to me, signing my first professional contract, getting shoved in my face in a changing room.
Just as well it was my last then. I was a bit worried about where venue would have been for next contract.
Probably been a pub or something like that.
A ropey nightclub in the town centre. But yeah, it's things have changed, and I don't blame people once again, because it's not a me situation, because loads of lads went through it. It's just that I've had an opportunity to reflect on what the experience is really, and in doing so, I think return to I just had this conversation with my old man. I still looked upon my rugby playing with a bit of shame and embarrassment, really. And actually, I probably belong to a really small percentage of people who played for the country, signed a professional contract. You know, I've been around the world and played a few games as well. I'm a lucky lad. I'm a really, really lucky lad. And I thought it was wrong that I looked back on it with that. And actually, you know, maybe this process actually has been quite cathartic for me. It's enabled me to reframe how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a common thing as well, what you've just said there, in terms of looking back on your career. No matter how successful, I know people who've had really successful careers but been really bitter about some things that have happened to them. But then, you know, when you write down the positives, they certainly can outweigh the negatives. And, you know, that thing that you talk about there, just having that gratitude for what you've done, I think that's a really powerful tool, the gratitude. In terms of when we feel like we're a bit done to. I'm certainly a big believer in gratitude. It's one of the things that we work towards with the Rugby League Curs when we're doing the presentation. We set people challenges and to do a gratitude list for 21 days, and it does change your perspective on things. You know, we're very, very fortunate in a lot of aspects. Even the fact that, you know, just having a roof over our heads and having central heating on and having food in the cupboard, you know, some days that it makes me so thankful that I've got that, because, you know, people might not believe this, but I've played rugby with lads who are now homeless, believe it or not. You know, and it's like, fuck, I'm in a really privileged position at the minute. Yeah, I'm not playing rugby, which I'd love to do. I'd love to be back in that environment. But ultimately, I'm so fortunate for what I've got. You know, there's not many. I mean, I'm not showing off with my England shirt here in the background. I'm actually at my mum's house, and she put that up on the wall.
Oh, nice.
But you know, like, so I'm at my mum's house today, and so that's why I'm doing the podcast here. And you know, and I can look at that when I come and think, fuck me, how lucky have you been? You know, because, you know, to achieve that, don't look back on your career like, oh, fuck me, it's over, and now what am I going to do? You've got to look at all the positive stuff, and I think it's a really powerful tool, the gratitude. Just going into the research side now, where you know, the vulnerability in rugby league, just tell us a little bit about how it got put together, because you had a great panel put together. Because you know, you said yourself I read your dissertation, and you were saying about the lack of research in vulnerability in rugby league. There was obviously research within sport, but rugby league was like quite a missed topic really within our sport. So you put a panel together. Do you want to just tell us how you did that and who you put together?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't want it to be something which is called in research, it's called autoethnographic, which basically is a long-winded way of saying about my perspective. I didn't want it to be that, because I want to show what my perspective was, and also, having not played in the professional game for a long, long time, I didn't necessarily feel like I could offer a perspective on that without end up doing just a big old long literature review. Before I get to the panel, I mean, I chose vulnerability because I'm a huge admirer and a fan, if you can call it that, of researcher and therapist, social worker, public speaker, and all-round wonderful egg, Brené Brown. She's amazing, absolutely amazing. And it was her whose YouTube video that we watched when we were at uni put it on, and she talked about the power of vulnerability and what it meant. And I was taken with it to a point that actually, when I came to pick my dissertation, look at it, I knew I wanted to do something about vulnerability and challenge the perception of it, and then look at rugby league. And I thought, that's a combination. That's a hell of a combination. But as I say, I didn't want it to be about my perspective really, and I didn't want to do a literature review. So we came across something called the Delphi method. Now, the Delphi method is used in nursing and the medical research. More than that, what it's done is it's like rounds of questionnaires, and ultimately, what you're doing, you're looking to come up with consensus, or you're looking, if you do it long enough, you're looking up to come up with something like grounded theory, which is a new theory that's never been sort of presented before. Given that the year that we had last year, it were really, really difficult to expect a panel to go through more than sort of 4 rounds, which I did. But I pulled this panel together, and I kind of knew who I wanted. I wanted a clinical perspective. I wanted players who played the game. I want players who were playing the game or had recently finished. And I wanted a woman's perspective as well. I wanted to look at the female game as well, so I thought it was really important. So I approached Dr. Phil Cooper, who was one of the founder members of State of Mind, which was pulled together, obviously, in the light of Terry's death. And has made such an impact on the game, between State of Mind and Rugby League Cares. The response for a small game, the response has been great. I know, having spoke to people from Cares and State of Mind, I know that we're not where we want to be as a game, but I tell you what, we're having a go, and things have to and will improve. But Phil's work, his research, and actually what he wanted to say in terms of in our initial conversation, I would absolutely want to have him on the panel. So he was brilliant. I spoke with Keegan Hurst as well. Asked Keegan to be involved. He was still in the game at the time, but by the time we'd done the panel, I think he'd done the research stuff. He'd just retired. Absolutely brilliant. Like, Keegan's story is immense, but more than that, he's just a good fella. Just a really good fella. Open, honest, vulnerable, articulate, speaks really frankly and really openly about his experiences, and not just about coming out, but more about the game as well. But actually, I think his experience by and large was pretty positive in coming out with his team. But that said, he still has some reservations about how we deal with certain things in the league, and he was brilliant. He was absolutely excellent. I spoke with Stevie. I listened to his podcast quite a lot, so I'd listened to his podcast with Brian Mack.
Yeah, that's a good episode. That.
Oh, it's superb, and it just shows the esteem that Brian holds him in. That he was prepared to speak to him about stuff that a lot of people will never heard him speak about.
What I will say about that podcast as well is that I actually watched that on YouTube, and I think it just adds a little bit more. So if anyone's going to listen to Stevie Ward talk to Brian Mack, I'd certainly recommend it on YouTube, because to see it on speaking as well, I think it just adds another dynamic.
It's a really good video, isn't it? It's really good.
Yeah.
And what I liked about Stevie, and what I still do, and what I respect about him now, obviously post-retirement, is the fact that he doesn't just focus just on rugby league. Mentality is an organisation that is not just about sport. It's not about sportsmen. It's not just about men anymore as well, even though the name sort of makes you think that. And so he's got quite a sort of wider holistic view of mental health. And so I contacted him, and he were up for it, and so he was on the panel. Then I spoke to Lois Forsell from Leeds Rhinos, whose career I'd sort of followed because she played at Bradford, and then she went to Leeds, which is pretty difficult for a Bradford fan, to be quite honest. But never mind, a few people have done it, JP included, and gone off and done better things as well, so it's delighted about that. But yeah, she went there, captained them, and then obviously post-injury, she started coaching as well. But I know that she'd had a really challenging time around her injury, because she'd still got plenty of games left in her as well, and so I know that was a real challenge. And she was brilliant, and she offered real perspective. And then my last panelist were a nervous one. I've said this on one with Stevie as well on podcast. I was pretty nervous about approaching Robbie Paul, because Robbie Hunter Paul, should I say, because I grew up as a Bulls fan in the 90s, and 2000 he was an icon in our house. I read his book. I understood that he had his moments. He'd had some real battles and challenges with his own mental health as well, particularly around the time that Bradford were slowly going under, and he was working a more of a commercial role for the Bulls there as well. That was really difficult for him. So I took a chance and, through contacts, I finally got hold of him. I was really nervous that he might be a bit of an arse because, you should never meet your heroes, should you? And even though I'd spent a bit of time in the professional game, I don't know him at all. Anyway, he absolutely couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been more helpful, couldn't have been more sort of he's got an intensity about him, a real intensity, and he's not prepared to give you an answer unless he's really thought about it. And actually, that really came out. Like I said, I don't go into anyone's answers at all, really, because I think that's like you say. I'm not looking to divulge people's answers in the research, but the quality and thought and care and consideration that he had for his answers, and he were always the last one to come in. I don't mind saying that. He's what last all time, and it will last because I knew I didn't mind after the first one. I was sweating on top line a little bit at first because I thought, bloody hell, is he going to send it in? Sort of quality, and I thought, no, I don't care if the rest of them are late, to be quite honest, because they're good, so I'm all right. But yeah, they were my panel, and they were brilliant. I also spoke with Sean Wayne, who was excellent, absolutely excellent. I asked for half an hour. Give me an hour and a half. We chatted about vulnerability. We chatted about the difference between preparing a player and preparing a man.
Yeah. We had Sean, when me and Mickey was involved in this together, we had Sean Wayne on and we did an episode with him, and absolutely both of us were taken back because we knew Sean from a coaching capacity and what, you see of him on TV and stuff, and when you bump into each other at certain functions. But he really opened up to us about, his childhood and then how that influenced him as a coach to make sure that his players never felt uncomfortable, and he prepared them. He wanted to put them in an environment that, basically excelled them. I know you said that in your dissertation as well. He openly says that, and it's such a lot of people from an outside point of view. I don't think the comments basically we got is that we never saw Sean Wayne like he spoke on the podcast. So it was really refreshing to hear that because, look, Sean likes his players to be as tough as they come. If you're not tough, you don't play for Sean Wayne. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
But he knows that you've just said it yourself there, there's a player and there's also a human being in there as well. And it's about getting the best out of that player. I just think he's a quality coach. And for him to have that self-awareness that to use his background to sort of shape how he's coaching now, I just think that's a great quality to have.
I couldn't agree more. And if you talk about toughness, and I think for 80 minutes, if you are a rugby player and you are fit and you are able and you're committed to your craft, 80 minutes of toughness, you can do that. You don't have to lead an invulnerable, inauthentic, bullshit life off the field. You don't have to do that. And I think that's where Sean's approach for me really, really struck, because it's about the fact that actually I'll take care of the man. I'll make sure that I'll remove barriers. I'll make sure they're taken care of. I'll make sure that they've got support and actually make them accountable to deliver for me. I want them to go out there and be ruthless and be tough and run through walls for me. But those players, having known that you've done that for them, I'm more likely to do it. It's a quid pro quo situation, isn't it? You know what I mean? They've been looked after. They've been given the arena in which to do the thing that they do best. And actually, some of that is the pastoral stuff. It is making sure that people know what they're doing. It is making sure that people are looking after the money, that they're coming in right at right time, that they're eating right, that they're not getting in with wrong crowd, that the stuff that went on in their childhood actually isn't reflecting on them now they've got a bit of money, that they're not having issues that's coming up from how they grew up as well. And I think that kind of insight is absolutely critical, and I think that's what it brings.
Definitely. read it again, going back to your dissertation there when I was reading it, and one of the questions I was asking myself, and I was sort of speaking to myself thinking, well, you know, I played 17 years of professional rugby league, but can I afford as a rugby league player to be vulnerable? And I'm asking myself that question because I didn't offer that vulnerability as a player. It's only when I stepped away from it and I did a bit of self-evaluation thinking, shit, I need change as a person here. My characteristics in rugby league are really going to hamper me. There's some great qualities that I picked up in rugby league that are going to excel me in my career. I've no doubt about that. But there's also some characteristics which would hinder me. And one of the things that I wrote down was that being vulnerable, you've got to be tough on a rugby league field, and you've just touched on it there for 80 minutes. But then when you come off that field, then you can be vulnerable. So there's a difference. We're not saying, look, you need to be vulnerable on the rugby league field. What we're saying is that there's stuff you need to come away from the rugby field, discuss and openly discuss, you know, don't put any boundaries in place, just discuss them with your manager and or your welfare officer or your psychologist or your counsellor, whoever you need to speak to. But I'm a big believer now that this is one of the big cogs in the wheel in terms of performance. I really do. It's such a broad aspect, and I've actually just been on like an intense training course with the Sporting Chance Clinic, and one of the counsellors there was actually talking about the fact that years gone by, they used to hear a coach turn around and they'd say things like, that lad doesn't give a shit, he's not interested, he's never going to make it. But what they failed to do is to try and recognise why that guy was feeling that way and why he was coming to training and not. He had all the skill attributes, but then he didn't have the motivation or the determination to push himself. And they were saying like a lot of these kids had internal issues going on, and they just couldn't. It meant they couldn't excel at the sport. And I just think that's something that's getting really big now within sport, is that people have gone through shit in childhood. People have had some really bad experiences, what makes them think people can turn around and, unless you know the backstory to them, that they don't give a shit, they're lazy, you know, they don't talk to people, they don't interact with people. And there's so many reasons for that. And I think it's a coach's job to get through that.
You're right. You're really right. And, you know, there's a couple of points here. The first thing to say is that I think from a neurological, from a personality perspective as well, pretty much a done deal by the time you're 7 years old in terms of your attachment style, in terms of how you interpret the world, how you think about things such as authority. You're pretty much done. Those ley lines, those neural pathways have been created and have to be uncreated or have to be worked with from then on in. And you know, it's when players come into the professional game, we're still carrying our quirks and our ways of learning and our hardwired ways of being from when we were a kid as well. And so that's really difficult. But just touching on the subject of vulnerability, I don't know how you think it could be perceived, but the idea of possibly walking onto a rugby field in front of thousands of fans to play a game in which you're going to feel pain, you're going to risk a bad performance in front of people, you're going to risk injury. That could be your last ever game. There are many ways to describe that, daft being one of them, but exciting and wonderful also being it as well. But it's completely vulnerable. You are not in control of all that environment. You can only control yourself. So what you do is you bring your best. But rugby league is a game, even though it is, I say my dissertation, it's in vulnerability brought to life. The act of walking out there, if we could control that game 100%, we'd all take that chance, wouldn't we? And part of the part of the mystery, part of the anxiety, part of the worry is the fact that we don't have full control out there when we're playing. Rugby league is a vulnerable endeavour because of its extremity, the extremity of it. And so if we don't think that we're not being vulnerable just by walking out there, we've another thing coming, because, you know, speak to a player who didn't realise they were playing their last game, and the risk, the uncertainty, it's there.
Do you know what? I can give you an example of where I could have shown more vulnerability when I was playing rugby. So for me, I'm quite sensitive as a person, but which people find hard to believe when they look at me. I'm covered in tattoos. Sometimes I could be a little bit dirty and stuff, and see me get a few cards and stuff playing rugby, but I'm quite sensitive. So if I did have a bad game, a bad performance, and I got slagged off over social media, it did affect me. It did. I didn't like being... I felt like I was letting the fans down. So to have that... when you do see things about you publicly by fans, I don't know anybody who I've played rugby with who it doesn't affect them. Now, I could have showed more vulnerability to that and spoke to my coaches or spoke to the staff and said, look, I'm struggling with this because I've played shit at weekend. I'm getting a shitload of abuse off Twitter. Like, I'm struggling with it. And instead, what I tried to do is I tried to do that typical man-up thing. Now, looking back, I could have, if I would have just spoke about it, and I would have, you know, put it out there, and maybe someone could have put it into... Basically, it probably doesn't sound like a massive issue from people listening in, but when you hear it from somebody else's perspective, you know, they can re-motivate you and tell you, you know, you're not a bad player just because you've had one game, but trying to do it yourself, I don't think... I can be quite negative with myself and put myself down quite a lot. So, you know, again, that would be my advice now, working with the young lads in the Warrington Academy now, would be, look, if you're struggling with this stuff, just tell someone, mention it, because you might, instead of having 5 or 6 weeks of where you're feeling a little bit in turmoil and it's affecting your performance, put it straight on the table and let's deal with it straight away.
Completely. You're so right, and your timing couldn't have been better, actually, because I've just obviously... Bradford have been mauled by Sheffield today, and I've gone onto Twitter and I've seen some of the worst things being said about players and about the club. You know, obviously at the minute with COVID, we're all watching through our league app and saying, you know, tenner for this, can't believe that, what a waste of money. Down, you know, you should all be ashamed of yourselves. But, you know, a lad at Leeds the other night whose name escapes me, a young lad who played 18-year-old kid getting a battering on Twitter, and I'm really glad to see other people come around and actually say, you know, players don't owe fans anything. They don't owe fans anything. And I speak as a fan. Fans, it's great to be a fan, and you know, you absolutely live and breathe your team, and I live and breathe mine, absolutely do. But everyone's trying the best. Everyone's having a go. And you know what? At the time when things are the worst, that's when players need support. That's when they need a G up and attaboy, you know, pat on the back and say, well done. Tearing people apart, actually, we don't owe them 100% performance, because people are entitled to not always hit their straps every game. And I find it really difficult. Maybe it's because I've seen a little bit of both sides, I don't know, but I'm sure the people who watch this will say he's talking shite, and actually players do owe fans this. But I mean, every one of those players is earning themselves a living. Every one of them players is doing something that a lot of those fans wish they could do too. And so I think there needs to be, there should be pressure and expectation, but respect, man, just respect.
Yeah.
I bet you've had very, very few fans come up to you, Woody, and say things that they've said on Twitter to your face.
Oh no, you don't get anybody say. The only
Massive
person
surprise.
No, the only person who gave me stick to my face was my mum. But she beat me up.
Yeah, and you see your mum. Yeah, that's fair enough. But you know, social media has enabled a lot of people who have never put boots on in their life. And you know, if you're gonna use the power of social media, give someone a geo. And so I fully understand that you felt how you felt. That must have been crushing. It's never happened to me, and I can't think of how worse because you can't control it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's only words. But I think when you're a professional athlete and it's your living, and people generally don't want to let the fans down. They don't want to let the club down. They don't want to let the coaching staff down. They don't want to let the family down. They don't want to let themselves down. But there's at the professional level, it's such a tightrope that you're walking because you've got to be fit physically, emotionally, and spiritually, if you will. And and it only takes one thing to be out of balance, and all of a sudden that performance turns into a shit performance, and you basically are walking a tightrope constantly. And you know, like people's relatives die, you know, family members get ill, and fans have no clue about this whatsoever. And that guy puts his hand up and says, "Do you know what? No, I'm going to play this week. It's what they would have wanted, or no, they've asked me to play," knowing that they're not in full frame of mind to actually participate in that game at a full capacity. You know, they're saying that they are, so the coach takes it on face value and puts them in the team. But that player's got issues, and then all of a sudden people are absolutely hammering them and verbally abusing them from the terraces, from Twitter, from social media. People tend, 99% of the time, people don't actually know what's going on and what's affecting that performance. All they turn around and say is, he can't be arsed, and it's a massive cop-out to say that. Yeah,
you're right. And you know, be a supporter because it's in the title of the thing you're supposed to be, support, or, you know, leave people alone and be kind a little bit, you know. It's about it, but like ripping someone apart that you wouldn't, you know, if you wouldn't say it to the face, and probably don't. I mean, people are entitled to their opinion, Paul. They are. They're entitled to their opinion, and you know, there's a lot. We live and operate in a very frank sport, don't we? Rugby league's a pretty frank sport. People will give you their opinion, whether you like it or not, and they're not looking for you to question them because they know that they're right. It's just the northern way, unfortunately. Unfortunately, the characteristic sometimes. But you know, just back your players. They'd thank you for it.
Yeah. That's it. That Luke, I've got the hindsight of being in a professional environment, seeing what goes into the build-up to a game, what goes on in the changing rooms, the preparation that goes in from the moment you sit down in front of a video to practicing tactics and your skill drills and everything else. I've got hindsight of that, and I know the effort that goes into it. Other people only see the 80 minutes on the field, and that's their week. For a lot of people, that's their week. You know, if that game's lost, it's like they go in work. They either go in work on Monday pissed off, or they go in happy because you've won. Yeah. Which we've just spoke about controlling the controllables. I ain't putting my happiness on any football or rugby team because I'll be a very unhappy man.
At Get a Tax Rebate, we make it easy for you or your business to claim back thousands of pounds in tax. Most people, like Jane and Philip, don't realise that they are owed money from HMRC, so they never claim. All you need to do is fill out a simple form on our website and we'll do the rest. It's that simple. We've also helped business owners claim back millions of pounds in research and development R&D tax credits. So if you're working in a business or own one, contact us today to see if we can help you claim back tax and improve your cash flow. Get a Tax Rebate, your tax refund concierge.
$18.95 Sports on State of Mind. the ultimate lineup.
Macy Vienna Aesthetics, based in Wigan. For all your wrinkle treatments, dermal fillers, lip enhancement, energy boost injections, immune boost injections. Please visit us on Facebook or Instagram at Macy Vienna Aesthetics.
CDX Security, proudly supporting rugby league.
Yeah, me too.
But just going back there, you touched on the cultures and the working class and the backgrounds, and rugby league is played in working class towns where they are full of. I live in Wigan; it's full of mills, coal mines. There's unemployment rate, and it says in your research about a lot of the towns that rugby league is played in, there's above average suicide rate in there. One of the surprises for me is that Catalans was second in France. St Helens was top, Catalans was second, which was quite interesting. But there's a culture, and there's I don't know how could I explain it. Basically, when we spoke to Martin Afire on the podcast, he talked about how he branded himself as a person. And I spoke to Jamie Jones Buchanan about this, and he tends to think that because we're from a working class background, we don't like to showboat. We're very modest people. Yeah. There's a cultural thing towards it. And what sort of stuff did you find in your research regarding that type of stuff around culture?
Well, I'd always known that rugby league was the preserve of the working class, having grown up in the working class and travelled to areas both in Wakefield, in West Yorkshire, and then sort of later on. All I was doing when I was going round and playing rugby, both amateur and professional, were travelling to the working class towns. Apart from when we went to London when I was playing at Huddersfield. But I knew that, and you have to be aware of something in research, not to go down the whole line of confirmation bias, which is basically just finding the evidence to back up what you know. So I did want to question it, but I spoke to Professor Tony Collins, who was a great sports historian. He contributes quite a lot to framing this understanding of where rugby league comes from, and he made a really good point. He says the mills and the pits and the yard and the shipyards and docks might have gone, but the mentality stayed. We've remained. The mentality has stayed, and chief among those places to find it is the game of rugby league, which continues to cultivate the same sort of themes, the same traditions, the same language and expectations of men, as it's always done. And here's the thing, the vast majority of that, so much of it is great. So much of that we don't want to change, because you know what, we're rather proud of our sport, we're rather proud of what we do. And but there is, within that, is that innate sense of handed on from generation to generation, this idea that when we're in pain, in any sort of pain, we don't say anything.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think there's a lot of things to be proud of being Northern. The Industrial Revolution, the coal mines, the mining, and I've got a little obsession with stuff like that. I love going to walking down the canal and looking at the mills and sort of imagining how that would be 100 years back, and the horses pulling the barges down the canal, and all the workmen would have just been in the area, and it's fascinating. And I used to have a gym. Me and Mickey's still running the gym. I used to be involved with it, and it's in an old mill. And every time I used to go in, I used to walk up the stairs and think, fuck me, there's not many people walked up these stairs. I wonder what it was like 100 years ago. And it just fascinates me. But there's so much that we should be proud of, being Northern. but like you said, that some of those qualities, they are good qualities, but then there's this macho man image that we try and live up to, and I think sometimes it's so detrimental to our character. It's, you know, well, what you've done your research on, you know, showing vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think what you said about what Jamie Jones Buchanan said is absolutely spot on. You know, chief among the things that we tend to dislike in the North, and rugby league's one of them, is someone who, for want of a better word, farts higher than their ass. Someone who, talk about Martin the Fire working on his brand. Fair play to him. That's a massively vulnerable thing to do. That's a huge risk in a game that doesn't particularly take people who will be that calculated and determined and authentic to do what they've done. And, you know, we don't tend to do that. We tend to diminish our achievements, and it's born into us. It's born into us a certain thing. And, you know, in just talking about my podcast, my presentation on this podcast, I'll go to bed tonight and I'll have that little voice in my head that says, "Who do you think you are?" Just by talking out about it. And part of me sort of doing this and speaking to people and that is because the university has been absolutely brilliant in supporting us to sort of understand how we should promote our research, and the other one is because it usually challenges my shame and my inbred northern prejudice for speaking out and going, have a look at this, it's all right. And that's basically all I'm doing. But even then, you still that voice in your head that goes, careful now, don't be one of them.
Yeah.
You have to be really, really careful.
I think a lot of the characteristics that we're speaking about, like you said, to be northern, there's some great qualities being northern. Like you said, being people tell you like it is, you know, that's a great quality to have, I think. You know, that honesty where if you're being a dick, someone just basically tells you, you know, there's loads of little quirks like that. But I think a lot of it, and I refer back to balance quite a lot when I'm speaking, because, you know, it's great being modest, but then again, you've still got to celebrate what you've done. You know, you speaking about your dissertation and this piece of research that you've done now, it's a great thing to speak about it. Why wouldn't you? You know, it's your passion. You've worked really hard to do it. Yeah, there's a level of modesty towards you, but you know, I think it's getting that balance into it. It's not being an absolute Floyd Mayweather. You don't need to be a Conor McGregor, but then you don't need to be Mother Teresa and show like complete humility in everything that you do. So I think there's a balance in that.
Yeah, there is, and absolutely, you get to a certain stage in your life, you get to a certain position where you know there's a finite amount of things that you're good at, that are your passion, that you can achieve, and that you can first of all do and keep a roof over your head, but more than that, that you can possibly really excel in. And I think when these aspects of your life are made clear to you, I think you get to a certain age where you think, there's only me that's going to paddle my canoe. Yeah. There's only me that's going to do this. I can sit around politely and wait for someone to tap me on the shoulder and say, it's your turn. Yeah. Or you go make your turn. And so I think that's something that I'd like to see more in the game in terms of around how we brand our sport and how we sort of push ourselves forward, because the Australians are not known for their shy and retiring approach to things, and how they brand the NRL and how they shout about their sport, which is also our sport, it is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, where there's a sort of disparity between the two countries in terms of the money that's in the game, but we have got a hell of a game, and I sometimes think we suffer from this idea that, you know, it's always around the corner, the next idea, and then, you know, we see this week that the North American Rugby League has been launched, and they've managed to do in a couple of weeks launch a national game that we've not done in 110 years. So I'm like,
yeah, it is amazing, and like I speak to good friends with Carl Fitzpatrick, who's CEO now at Warrington. Yeah, known each other a number of years, and we speak about the marketing side and stuff, and he's a big advocate of, you just said it there, you paddle your own canoe. Players have got to be more proactive on social media. They've got to be responsible for they put the right content out there, because it's so easy for them to put the wrong stuff out as well. But they've got to promote themselves. And there's this argument that rugby league players need to get paid more money because of the job that they do and the physicalities they put themselves through. Well, yeah, they do want paying more, but if they want paying more, then they've got to understand that they do have to promote themselves. So when the club's asking them to do promotions and interviews for paper and promote themselves more on social media, unfortunately, that is the job that they have to do, if they like it or not. And we need to be better at the sport of saying to players, look, it's fine to be that type of, if you can back it up. You've got to be skillful to be a Conor McGregor sort of, showboat, but you've got to be able to advertise yourself, put yourself in the shop window, gain your followers, make yourself a product where people are attracted to you and sponsors are coming to you.
Yeah, and I guess this is where I sort of drift towards my sort of therapy head really here, my therapeutic bent around sort of the difference between vulnerability and exposure. And I think rugby league players' primary focus is to play the game, and they do something that 99% of us can't do. So, their primary responsibility is to run out there and to represent the clubs and to earn a living. The social media stuff, social media is vicious, and I always have some concerns when players take to it with enthusiasm, but little else really. And they've got to understand, and they've got to be trained and supported by their clubs to do it safely and securely. And even then, they're going to cop the horrible shit that you copped as well. They're going to get horrible DMs. You see the stuff that footballers, they really curate their brand, really curate their brand on social media. And there's black players, people of colour are still getting horrible messages and stuff like that. And so it's when you put yourself into that arena, it's a fine line between vulnerability and exposure. Being vulnerable, I'm a huge advocate of. Overexposure to a point where you're completely not in control. It's a fine line, I think, to be honest. Yeah.
I think again, I use the word balance. Getting that balance right. You're constantly walking a tightrope, and you do need to make sure that you're completely balanced in that situation. Going back to vulnerability, I think a massive milestone in mental health, and for me, this was a massive turning point, especially in rugby league. I knew Terry personally. I'd been involved in a couple of Great Britain camps with him. We'd socialised together at times, both Wigan lads. Terry was as tough as they come. One of the toughest blokes I've ever met. One of the most skillful and natural rugby league players that I'm fortunate to play against and with. And obviously, Terry taking his own life was a massive thing in rugby league, and I think people thought, wow, this big tough guy who played the game at 100 mile an hour, and as tough as he was, if that can happen to someone like Terry, then there's something needs to be done about this.
Yeah. It was massive for everyone. No more so than his family, really. The impact that it's had on them, and when I looked at his book and read his book, it was a second volume. It was after he died. It was a second edition, and his dad had written a really lovely piece in the book about, which I actually use in my research. I use in my literature review and quote it, that said that, knew that he was struggling, but he was just unable to speak out. And that, the way in which a father talks about his son, in that no father should ever have to do that. And I think you're right. What Terry represented in the game, he wasn't everyone's favourite player, because he played right on the edge, but he was hard, he was uncompromising, you know, he came to Bradford for a bit, so I immediately forgave him for all stuff he'd done to us while he played at Leeds and Wigan, so that was fine. And you know, just a player who bounced everywhere. He was quite good. I know people who know him, and you know, was quite a gregarious character. And it's a huge part of vulnerability is this an ability to understand when we're not right. And you know, there's only Terry that'd ever know really. But I think part of what his dad said was that we just couldn't get to him. We just couldn't get to that point. You know, to speak out and get to that point where he was able to reach out and say, "I'm not right." You know, those things, the reasons and the struggles and the pain and the demons that he was facing went with him to the grave, and it was. I mean, yeah, you know, since we lost him, the response has been better and it's been positive, but you know, it was a hell of a price to pay. Hell of a price to pay.
Yeah, it's something I'll never forget. I remember getting the phone call the day that it happened. Somebody rang me up and asked me, was it true? And I said, categorically won't be true. I said, that's just a rumour, because the day before, what happened was we had an end of season trip to Magaluf in 2010, and we'd just done 3 days away as a team. We'd won the Challenge Cup that year, so we got a bonus and we all went to Magaluf on an end of season trip. And on the last day, Terry rang my phone and asked would we be interested in going to a charity event at his pub. And there was me, Adrian Morley, Mickey Iron and Lee Breers in this room, and we was passing the phone around and we was all talking to Terry and no inclination that there was anything wrong with him. So when I found out the day after, I just remember I literally just put my head in my hands, went over to my local gym in Wigan and just sat in the sauna for about an hour with my head in my hands. I just couldn't believe what had happened after speaking to him the day before. And that moment in rugby league for me has changed how it's made coaches look at the past behaviour. It's made coaches assess their current behaviour, whether they're still in coaching. And I think it's showing that players are vulnerable and, you know, the masks that players are wearing constantly. And like I say, you know, we've touched on it previously that, yeah, for 80 minutes, Luke, be as tough as you want. You know, do what you want on a rugby field, be tough, be aggressive, be uncompromising, because that's what great coaches want of you. But when you're off the field, please, if you do feel vulnerable, that you do speak to people, because it's tragic when things like that happen. You just, once it's done, isn't it? You just can't fix that situation.
That's unfixable. That's a decision where there's no comeback. And you know, I didn't know Terry, but I feel he's lost as a member of the rugby league community. But more than that, as a man who's faced my own mental health problems back in the day, not too distant past, but sits with a lot of people now as a therapist who are in a similar pain, and it's a sight to behold. Someone who feels that they have absolutely no choice but to seek that release, and it is ultimately the wrong decision. But it's such a difficult conversation to have, to convince someone who is in so much pain and sees no other way. But to do that, to choose to fight back and to choose to find some meaning in what's going on. And I think rugby league will always have a reason to be proud about how it responded to his death, and how as a small game, you know, a big game with a small coverage in this country, how we've responded and how we pulled together, and how we continue to do it today. You know, our response to Mossimo this weekend has been absolutely brilliant. How we've got together for him. You know, the Rob Burrows story, which perfect timing actually. Get your Rob Burrow beers. started have one tonight, and cheers him. But you know what a price to pay! What a horrible price to pay for our new way of doing things, and that ultimately really fascinated me, as well as made me extremely sad when I was doing the research, but really fascinated me about how rugby league compartmentalises what we ask of players, and actually how we work with the man and or woman off the field as well.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate enough at the moment I'm involved with the Rugby League Curse charity, promoting mental fitness programs from the age of 12 years of age up to all the way through, from players to coaches in the men's and the women's game, because it's been identified that, you know, the working class backgrounds and the rugby league towns, there's a higher suicide rate, so the message needs to go out. And you know, the rate of suicide goes up after professional retirement, you know, in rugby league, which I'm taking from your paper, by the way. So you just so you know, I have read it. But going back to Rugby League Curse, Steve McCormack, Francis Stevenson now are doing some great work now with the transition process and what happens in it with rugby league players, and you know, the managing it, the making sure they touch base with players. There's a process now in play to make sure that, you know, we can hopefully prevent this type of thing from happening again, because it is tough. I mean, I feel quite fortunate when I retired from rugby, that I did 3 years within the game in a coaching capacity, but then I've just said it. I come out the game when I chose to come out. I think if I would have just come out of the game from a player and gone into a working environment, that transition would have been chalk and cheese. My environments would have just been so difficult to comprehend, really. I feel like I was weaned off it in a way, because I was still involved for 3 years, but then I went into a normal working environment, and I still found that tough. I still found that really tough. So it's great that people are looking at this stuff now, because I tell you now, playing rugby league for a living is completely different from going into a working environment. It's completely different.
I was having a conversation with one of my oldest mate, actually, Stu Dickens, who plays at, you'll know Stu through Cares, but I went to school with Stu. He were on my school team, hence why we were so good. We've got quite a few players who were very, very good, and Stu was one of them. But we had a conversation, and obviously he's doing some good stuff for Wakefield now. And we were just reflecting, and Stu contributed to my dissertation as well. And one of our conversations that impacted on it was the fact that being a professional rugby league player is not like any other job on earth. It's completely unique, and this is something that I think he's working with the players there to really understand. You're the odd one. The world is not odd. You're the odd one, and when you go back to joining that world, whenever that might happen, you've got to have an understanding that is enriched by your rugby league experience, not one that the rugby league experience blinds you to. You know, you've got your rugby league experience has not got has cloud your judgment about a life lived after rugby league, because you know the vast majority of your life should be ahead of you once you finish that game.
Yeah. No, completely. It is that is exactly how you said it. Then I touched on that. There's certain qualities within rugby league that have been enhanced for me that'll make me an excel in any career. You know, there's businesses out there. I'm subscribed to a couple of companies now who speak with employees, and they specifically want to target ex-professional sports athletes, because they know that those qualities can really excel in their business. Yeah. But then, you know, there's some of those qualities where they do make you odd. It's like you said, the other industries are not weird. It's us that are a bit weird going into it. And I always use But I always use the example of when rugby league was it was a safe place for me, and it's something I felt I was in control in. And if ever I was frustrated with somebody in my training team or the coaches, it was dealt with straight away. There was that masculinity where you faced up to each other, you put everything on the table and you sorted it because you knew you had to for the team dynamics. Otherwise, that would affect our performance. So we was taught quite early on, if there's any differences, if you're not friends with a teammate, you need to sort everything out. But it's very difficult to do that in a normal workplace. And sometimes they have the added advantage of if we had a wrestle session, I could take my frustration out on somebody else for 40 minutes, or they could take the frustration out on me for 40 minutes. Yeah. Now, if I'm on a building site and someone's pissing me off, I can't tell them come and have a 40-minute wrestle session with me in canteen. I've got to deal with it like an adult.
I mean, you can.
Well, you can, but you don't last in your jobs that long.
Yeah, you have a choice to make. Yeah, you're completely right. There is a language and a code and a way of being around rugby that, yeah, as you pointed out, translates into certain aspects of the working world brilliantly, but otherwise the way in which players speak to each other and operate and our expectations of other people, and I still say our, because I know it's left its mark on me. I know what, I know what those environments are like. It can be a bit of an ill-fitting shoe once you're out in working world. Yeah.
So I tend to think the qualities that do hinder us are the aggressive side and the macho side of the game, really. Like I say, I mean, I've been sat in so many team meetings where, specific players have had issues with performance, or they're not pulling the weight. And it's just sorted straight away. And I've took that into a normal working environment where, you need to sort it now. You're not leaving this room until it's sorted. And I can get quite abrupt and be abrupt. And people have said, like, you're angry. And I don't see myself as an angry guy.
Just been
Yeah, I'm not angry. And people say, you get quite angry, don't you? And I say, I'm not fucking angry. I don't see myself as angry, but I do have to take a step back, and it goes back to like this self-reflection thing, which I am big on now. And like, hang on a minute, let me put myself in somebody else's shoes. This guy's worked in an office for the last 20 years. He's been hitting like spacebar and entering a couple of keys all his life. He probably does see me as aggressive, where I probably just see myself as just getting on with shit. You know what I mean? So it's perceptions into the know with other people see it.
And I think, you've got to have a certain amount of these traits to play the game anyway. And so these traits don't leave you. And, I have of my qualities, patience isn't one of them. And so meetings that go on and on and on and on, I'm quite likely to find me going, this is bullshit. This is wasting time. I really struggle with things that have no consequence on talking shops. No point. And it's never left me. Team meetings, I'm from the school. Team meetings used to be 15, 20 minutes done on the end. So anything that drifts into just talking shops still irritates me now. And it's just opportunity for people just to rattle on and actually, you know what, I'd rather get on with my job.
In terms of players finishing, what sort of process do you feel they need to go through to sort of, you're mourning a loss, aren't you? If you're involved, I mean, you mentioned Liam Price in your dissertation, and I watched the interview on Rugby AM that you actually referenced, and he was clearly struggling, and he broke down and he was in tears. And what sort of a process do you feel? And that's not uncommon. It's just that happened on TV. There's been plenty more players who have done that in the four walls of their own house with the family. But what sort of a process would you say would help players to go through?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of responsibility that the game's got to transition players out safely and securely. And I know that's something that Francis Stevenson and Rugby League Cares are really focusing on doing and improving, because it's been acknowledged as an area of an issue. And to speak about Leon and what he said, that for me was vulnerability in action. To go on TV with one of your mates and show that amount of authenticity and just absolute vulnerability, and say, this is what it's like for me. Vulnerability is a really, really difficult thing, because to us it feels like the sort of stuff we need to hide. But when you see it in other people, it's the thing that really, really, really connects you and makes that person grow as a human in your eyes. And I don't know Leon Price, but to hear him and see him speak with such authenticity that day, that's why I included it, because for me it was vulnerability in action. It was vulnerability come to life. This is what is going on for me. This is the reality of the situation. He wasn't afraid to show his tears. And I just thought it was amazing. It's so sad that he felt that way on the day that he did. And the environment, or that the game of rugby has not supported our players in the way that sometimes it should do previously. However, you're right in the word that it is a loss. And I talk about in my dissertation, I've coined the phrase metagrief, which is a really farty way of saying it's like a death, but not. It's akin to a death. There's been a phrase kicking around for a long, long time saying sports people die twice, and it's bloody right. It's absolutely right. We go through a death of self. We go through a death of identity, a death of who we are. The things that are important and we rely on a day-to-day basis are suddenly taken away from us. Our feel-good drugs that we create based on doing that job well disappears. Find me a drug that gives you the equivalent of walking out in front of thousands of people cheering your name. Find me a drug that, is equivalent to stepping your way to trial line in a grand final. And it should be banned, because it'll be amazing, because that's a hell of a drug. And this is an environment in which, many players are lucky enough to find themselves in. And so when you no longer have that, the person that you are, it is not. And I was really interested. I've done a bit of client work recently around this subject. And a client recently said to me that when they were in hospital and diagnosed with a quite rare but life-threatening condition, they knew from that point on their life was changed, and that everything that had gone on before had been taken for granted, because they knew that suddenly life as they knew it would never be the same. And that's what happens when we retire, to a less extreme extent. However, the consequences can be quite harsh when suddenly the world continues, rugby league continues, we continue, and yet a death occurs because we're not in the thing that defines us, and that's really, really, really impactful on players. In terms of what I would do, as a psychotherapist, I can only speak from what's in my wheelhouse, and approaching retirement from a grief model makes complete sense to me. Understanding those 5 stages of grief, understanding that we will go through some denial, understanding that we'll go through some anger, understanding that we'll go through some bargaining, that we'll hit depression, that we might go to acceptance, that we might go back and forth, and that it's actually a fairly inconsistent line of trajectory, and that we are going to flip back and forth, but actually get into acceptance and actually get into some meaning and understanding who we are and what we are without rugby league, and that actually the game's not closed off to us. We can still maintain a love and an involvement in the sport. It's just not as it was.
Yeah, you talked about meaning there, and again, this is, in fact, I read this in the research actually, and it's something Stevie Ward actually said to me last week, and he quoted Nietzsche where he said, "He who has a why to live can be with almost any height.
Yeah.
Can bear with almost any height. And that's so poignant for me because I've touched on that I've started my counselling course now, and that's the only thing since finishing rugby that I'm excited to go back to when I come away from my books. So, and that feeling is, I took my lad rugby training today, and me and a lad who used to play rugby, same club, and we was comparing how the kids are today to how we was, and the attitudes and the behaviours. And I was saying that I used to cry when a game was called off because of a waterlogged pitch, and I'd be crying at home saying I won't play rugby, and I was 16 at the time. I'd have been about 12 or 13 though, and I was literally in tears if a game was called off. That's how much I love the game. And so doing this counselling now, I've had, since being away from the game for 3 years of doing the coaching, the fitness side of it, that wasn't for me. And then I've kicked a few more tires since I've come out of rugby, and I feel like I've finally found something that's a passion. And I think that's a big thing for players, knowing that rugby's gone and there will be another element of something that you will enjoy and you'll have that same passion. But Brian Kearney said to me a couple of weeks ago when I was speaking to him on phone, he said, Phil Clark gave him a great bit of advice, and he said, no matter what job you get, you don't have to stay in it for the rest of your life. And I'm a big believer that people do that. They get a job and they stay in it because they're comfortable. It's not necessarily because they enjoy it. And that's not me. I've kicked so many tires coming away from rugby to try and find something that I'm passionate about. I finally feel like I've found something. So I think that's a big one for rugby league players, to get that enthusiasm over something else.
Meaning and purpose. That quote from Nietzsche, it's in a really good book that I'd recommend to anyone. It's a book that Steve and I talk about quite a lot. It's Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And Frankel's story is absolutely critical because he spent some time in Auschwitz as a prisoner. I think you and I have talked about this before, haven't we? And he spent some time in Auschwitz as a prisoner, and he found out that the people who survived, if they weren't arbitrarily killed, a lot of the people who made it, they'd got something in their head and they expressed a passion or a drive for a life outside of those gates, that if they were lucky enough to survive and they weren't shot or gassed, they could return to it. And it was that, if you've got a why, I can get through this how. If I've got something that burns inside me, I'll see this time over, I'll get through it. And so that's such a strong story. And I think, educating players while they're in the game to understand that while rugby league is chief among their qualities and their identities, it's not their only one. And when they come out of the game and the game is no longer there, it's then an opportunity for them to start looking at the other opportunities, the other things and other skills that they've got, and finding new meaning as well. Because I had a conversation with someone at weekend the other day, and they went, "Can't rugby players just go into presenting and stuff like that?" I said, "How many jobs do you think there are in presenting?" That's it. They're just hanging off trees, aren't they? I think Brian Kearney takes some shifting, but they're just hanging off trees, aren't they? Yeah, and, there's loads of coaching jobs, and absolutely, not everyone, as you said yourself, not everyone's cut out for that. Not everyone's cut out to be a coach. Not everyone wants to do that, and so being supported to find your passion doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an extension of rugby league as well.
And do you know what? I refer back to Carl Fitzpatrick, who's now CEO at Warrington. And he's found his passion. He's found that business. He did the MBA, the Master's Business degree, and
MBA, the one that he looked at and went, nah.
Yeah, that one. I remember him studying for that, and he passed it, and he's found his passion. And I've said to him, it's great that you found it, because a lot of lads don't, and that's why they struggle, because they go into an industry So me, for example, I went into construction when I come away from the coaching side. And it was, the novelty of it was great for the first 12 months because it was something different. But then I woke up one day and went, this is not what I'm doing for the rest of my life. It can't be, because I just do not get any. I started getting that Monday feeling, you know, when you was on a Sunday night and you think, shit, it's work tomorrow. And I've never experienced that. So that was a key indication for me to think, hang on a minute, no, that there must be something where Sunday you're actually looking forward to going to work on a Monday. There's got to be something out there. And there's been a lot of trial and error, and look, there's been a lot of arguments at home as well because of it, because they're like, fuck me, will you find something you enjoy? And I'm like, I will do when I find it.
You find it, yeah.
So, mate, it's been a long process, this. It really has. I mean, I retired officially in 2015. I went back playing for 4 games in 18 because I fucking were missing it that much. Did 4 games and then realised, no, I'm actually now too old for it. I've done so much soul searching in the last 5 or 6 years. It's been unreal, and it has been a difficult process. It really has. You leave school when you play rugby for so long, it's difficult. But you know, I feel like I'm getting there now.
Yeah.
Feel like I'm getting there.
Sound like it as well. We had that big long chat that we had. And I was really sort of chuffed to find out that counselling is somewhere where you think you found your home as well, because that happened to me, and I think you're always where you're meant to be, to more or less an extent in your life. You're not where you are is not where you'll stay, but right there, what is it telling you? And I look at the failures, of which I count rugby to a certain extent as one of mine. Amidst the really, really good stuff that I was privileged to be involved in. But I needed to go through what I went through and my experience there, and have sort of 20s where I really didn't do anything. I'd, jumped from job to job, tried to find myself, into my 30s where I lived in London, and then moved Southwest Wales, got married, got unmarried. And it's only now that I've got to sort of like late 30s and I'm now into my 40s that I found not only is counselling what I want to do, but the life I've led kind of set the context for an understanding about how to live a life a little bit. I couldn't have done this at 20. I'd have been the world's shittiest, most arrogant cocksure rubbish counsellor. Everyone was like, oh, fine, mate. And actually, it's given me some compassion. It's given me some perspective, and I'm where I'm meant to be now. And the great thing about it is I intend to stay here a little bit as well.
Yeah, mate, I completely agree with you, because I feel exactly the same at the minute when I'm looking back and I'm reflecting and I think, fuck me, I've done all these different things, and then it's like, hang on a minute, it's taking all them things you've been involved in, all the experiences that you've had, have took you to your counselling now, and it's give you a better understanding of people, and it's made me more empathetic, and it's given me more understanding, and it's made me a more patient person. I talked about the qualities that have hindered me in the jobs that I've done. It's made me sort of reflect and change those qualities. It's as though like I didn't go straight to the counselling because I wasn't ready. It's like somebody up there knew that I wasn't quite ready. So I completely agree. It's tough sometimes to think that way when you just want to jump from A to B, but sometimes you've just got to go from A to B to C, and there's a couple of other stepping stones along the way, and I'm quite impatient. So even though I've signed up to this 12-month counselling course, I try to do it all in a month. I'm that impatient. But that's me being aware of, hang on a minute, take a step back. I know when to stop my studies, when to go back to my studies. So I'm getting a lot better at that. But they're all qualities I've learned recently. Rugby league environment, I don't need to be patient. I've never had to be patient for anything, whether that's financially or You have a shit game, you're playing 5 or 7 days later, you can put everything right in space of a week.
Yeah, that's true.
Completely different in the normal world. So
it is, and it sounds like you've made a heck of a start to it, mate. So best of luck with it.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. But yeah, hopefully this is it now. I've found my passion and I'll think. But mate, it's been really interesting to hear your perspective on everything that, you know, with your research. Hopefully you've got more things in the pipeline with that and you can extend it, because it sounds like you've sort of left it open there for more studies to be done within rugby league, which would be, you know, be really great. To have a look at.
I mean, masters can sometimes pose more questions than provide answers, and you know, mine just ended up creating loads of sort of questions that I'd like to sort of discover further. So I think there's going to be further research, hopefully further research in the near future. Looking to sort of get some partners on board to support that as well, because I'm really hoping to sort of bring it within sport and hopefully with the league context as well. So yeah, and you know, alongside 2 clinics, plenty of work to be had as well. So I'm going to be busy, but like you said, when you find where you're supposed to be, those Sunday evenings are painful.
Yeah, well, do you know what as well? I think you're in the right sport for the avenues that you're looking at, because rugby league now is so proactive in this stuff. You know, we had again when we was on the Sporting Chance, on the course with the Sporting Chance, they was actually saying about how there's a high level of rugby league players using their services. And one of the questions that got asked was, is it because we're quite extreme characters? And the answer was, it's not. It's just the fact that rugby league is so proactive now with rugby league players asking for help. Rugby league is like the forefront of sport now, where players are coming forward and saying, look, I've got an issue. And whether that's addiction, depression, you know, mental illness, or whether they're just going through difficulties in their life, they've got really low mood, the lads are starting to put their hands up, which, you know, it is good to hear. It is good to hear.
Really good. It's really good, and there's a lot that in 5-10 years time is going to be even better. But right now, I think as a sport that's not the national sport of this country, I think we've got, although it should be, we've got a hell of a lot to be proud of. And you know, it's great that those players are sort of coming forward and putting their hand up and saying, I don't need everything, but I definitely need something. It doesn't, you know, help and support doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to, it's not a label. It's about self-identity and awareness that you're going to need a little bit more. And that's brilliant that we've got the players doing that as well. So.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they said to us. Sometimes you're going to get players coming towards you who were saying, look, I don't actually know what's up on there. You just got to do a little bit of digging, you know, and get them to answer the questions and bring it out themselves, because it will be in there. But there are a lot of people who just think, I feel fucking shit, but I don't know why. You know, that's quite common.
Super. Well, you know, things have changed. I know that when I started out, and when you started out a couple of years later, it simply wouldn't have happened. And so, you know, rugby was where you were tough, no questions asked. It's where you were a man, no questions asked. And now the fact that you can be tough, you can be a man, but actually part of being those two things is understanding when actually you need to put your hand up. That's brilliant. And so I'm pretty proud that we're moving towards an environment where that's going to be more and more prevalent.
Yeah, well, if it's good enough for Sean Wayne, it's good enough for me, because I'm not arguing with him.
No, I tell you what, I'm 40 years old with it. I'm 41 now, actually, as of last week. I had a conversation with him, and I wanted to put my boots back on.
Yeah.
I did. I thought I would play for you pretty poorly and for about 10 minutes before I fell apart, but I would play for you. And I was like, yeah, he does that to people. So yeah, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. Yeah.
Yeah. John, thanks for coming on, mate. It's been brilliant, mate, and hopefully that that research that you've left open there is is on the forefront and you can do your PhD next, hopefully.
Yeah, who knows. Cheers, Paul. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Cheers, John. Ta, mate.
Bye-bye.